The LCBO, the world's largest alcohol buyer, has removed every single bottle of American booze from its shelves, causing billions of dollars in lost sales for U.S. alcohol producers. The reaction from the U.S. has been intense, with Kentucky's governor in a frenzy and Mitch McConnell likely pulling his hair out. Kentucky, home to bourbon, relies heavily on Ontario's LCBO as one of its biggest customers. This move hits the U.S. where it hurts. But Canada isn't stopping there. They're targeting potash, uranium, and energy exports. Potash is critical for fertilizers, and 87% of Canada's supply goes straight to the U.S. If Canada halts exports, American farmers will be in deep trouble. Finding potash elsewhere won't be easy, especially when most of it would need to be transported via the Mississippi River, which Canada controls. Meanwhile, uranium is another pressure point. While the U.S. could look elsewhere, their main alternative is Russia. Would they really want to rely on Putin for nuclear energy during heightened tensions with Moscow? Probably not. Despite these threats, Trump remains unfazed. He's just announced a fresh wave of tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, imposing a 25% tariff on all imported goods from Canada and Mexico, except oil, which gets a 10% tariff, and an additional 10% on Chinese imports. His justification? Stopping fentanyl from entering the U.S., claiming it pours in from China through the northern and southern borders. However, critics argue that punishing Canada and Mexico won't solve the fentanyl crisis. Targeting China directly would be more effective. Canadians are furious. Just last month, a deal was supposedly in place to pause tariffs, with Canada and Mexico agreeing to stricter border patrols and drug enforcement in exchange for no new tariffs. But now that the pause is over, Trump is slapping them with tariffs again, making it seem like he was never serious about the deal. Canada is ready to retaliate with $15 billion in counter tariffs and an even bigger $3 billion package if the U.S. doesn't back down. Trump claims there's no room left for negotiation, insisting the tariffs are final. However, his press secretary contradicted him on live television, saying the tariffs are just a negotiating tool, part of Trump's strategy to bring jobs back to America. So, are these tariffs a permanent punishment, or is Trump using them as leverage to force Canada and Mexico to concede? No one knows for sure, but history suggests another last-minute deal might be on the horizon. At the same time, Trump is sending a message to China. Many believe the real solution is to target China with even higher tariffs, pressuring the Chinese Communist Party while pushing manufacturing back to the U.S. However, Canada and Mexico are caught in the crossfire and aren't backing down. The Ontario Premier has already called on other provinces, Quebec, Manitoba, and British Columbia, to join the retaliation. If they do, the economic impact on the U.S. will be massive. Eastern Canada supplies significant energy exports to the U.S., and if they cut off that flow, Americans will feel the pain at the pump immediately. Canada is already holding emergency meetings with European allies to strengthen trade agreements and pivot away from North America. European leaders are eager to increase imports of Canadian resources, further weakening U.S. leverage. Talks are also underway with Asian markets for alternative buyers of uranium, potash, and energy exports. If these deals go through, the U.S. could soon find itself without access to essential Canadian resources. If Canada follows through on its threats, the consequences for the U.S. will be severe. Liquor stores, gas stations, and entire supply chains will feel the impact. Prices on food and consumer goods will skyrocket because Canada plays a crucial role in U.S. agriculture and manufacturing. American businesses, especially those reliant on Canadian imports, are already sounding the alarm. Farmers, manufacturers, and retailers warn that these tariffs could backfire, making life more expensive for everyday Americans. Energy is a major concern. A significant portion of the northeastern U.S. depends on Canadian energy exports, including hydroelectric power from Quebec, oil from Alberta, and natural gas from other provinces. If Canada slows or halts these exports, states like New York, Michigan, and Pennsylvania will see their energy bills surge. Some Canadian officials have even suggested cutting off power exports entirely, forcing the U.S. to scramble for alternatives, potentially a devastating blow, especially in winter. The bigger picture is clear. The U.S. has long relied on Canada as a stable and reliable trading partner, but if Canada deepens its ties with Europe and Asia, it could permanently shift economic power away from North America. Some analysts suggest this could mark the beginning of Canada's move toward economic independence from the U.S., a future Washington won't be happy about. Trump is betting that Canada will blink first and return to the negotiating table on his terms. But so far, that's not how things are playing out. Canada is digging in, and they're ready to make this painful for everyone involved. If Trump thought this was going to be an easy win, he might have miscalculated. And it's not just Canada pushing back. Mexico is in a similar situation, facing a 25% tariff on all imported goods. But Mexico has leverage too. The U.S. depends on Mexican supply chains for everything from auto parts to produce. A disruption there could mean higher prices for cars, electronics, and even basic groceries. And let's not forget, Mexico is the U.S.'s largest trading partner. Messing with that relationship isn't just risky, it's potentially disastrous. Will Trump hold his ground even as U.S. businesses start to suffer? Will Canada and Mexico follow through on their threats and push America into an economic corner? Or will we see yet another last-minute deal where both sides claim victory and move on? One thing is for sure, this isn't just a trade dispute anymore. This is turning into a full-scale economic war, and neither side looks ready to back down. Meanwhile, the semiconductor battle is heating up. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, just announced a massive $100 billion investment in U.S. chip manufacturing. The goal? To shift semiconductor production away from Asia and ensure the U.S. isn't overly reliant on Taiwan for its most advanced chips. But here's the catch: Taiwan is now in a tricky position. The island has long held a strategic advantage because of its dominance in chip production. If the U.S. builds its own chip infrastructure, Taiwan could lose its so-called silicon shield, which has been a major deterrent against Chinese aggression for years. Taiwan's dominance in chip production has been its best defense. China has always wanted control over Taiwan, but the fact that the entire world depends on Taiwanese semiconductors has kept full-scale conflict at bay. If Taiwan's chip manufacturing shifts to the U.S., that shield weakens. The big question now is whether this move actually increases Taiwan's vulnerability. If the world stops relying on Taiwan for chips, does that give China more reason to make a move? That's the concern some analysts are raising. Trump, meanwhile, is pushing hard for domestic manufacturing, using tariffs as a weapon to force companies to produce in the U.S. rather than overseas. Companies like Apple, Nvidia, and Intel are watching closely. If these tariffs stay in place, many of them will have no choice but to bring manufacturing home or face higher costs. The bigger question is, will this strategy work? Will it actually make the U.S. a global leader in semiconductor production? Or will it just disrupt supply chains and drive up prices for consumers? And it's not just about chips. The U.S. is trying to position itself as the world's new manufacturing powerhouse, but it's facing major challenges. Building a semiconductor factory isn't as simple as flipping a switch. It takes years, billions of dollars, and a highly skilled workforce. The U.S. is investing heavily in chip manufacturing, but catching up to Taiwan's expertise won't happen overnight. China, of course, isn't sitting quiet. They're rapidly expanding their own chip production capabilities, determined to reduce reliance on both the U.S. and Taiwan. With U.S. sanctions limiting China's access to advanced chip technology, Beijing has been pouring money into its own semiconductor industry, trying to close the gap. And they're making progress. While the U.S. is trying to cut China off, China is working around those restrictions, finding loopholes and developing its own supply chains. There's also the elephant in the room: AI. Advanced chips aren't just about making faster phones and computers, they're the backbone of artificial intelligence. The U.S. is determined to maintain an edge in AI development, but if China gains access to the latest chips, that could change everything. The Biden administration had already put restrictions in place to limit China's access to AI-capable chips, and now Trump is doubling down with even tougher trade barriers. At the same time, companies like TSMC, Samsung, and Intel are navigating these geopolitical tensions carefully. No one wants to be caught in the middle of a U.S.-China tech war, but that's exactly where they are. If they keep producing chips in Taiwan, they risk getting caught up in a potential conflict. If they move manufacturing to the U.S., they weaken their own bargaining power. It's a no-win situation for the industry. And let's not forget about Europe. The European Union is also investing billions in semiconductor production, trying to reduce its dependence on both the U.S. and China. They don't want to be left behind in the chip race, and they're working to build their own manufacturing capabilities. The problem? It's incredibly expensive, and the EU is years behind both the US and Asia in terms of infrastructure. While all this is happening, China has made its own move. A new AI company, DeepSeek, has exploded onto the scene, positioning itself as a serious competitor to OpenAI. The catch? It was built at a fraction of the cost. While OpenAI spent billions developing its models, DeepSeek allegedly did the same with just a few million. That's raised serious questions. Did they innovate, or did they copy? Some experts are pointing out the striking similarities between DeepSeek's model and ChatGPT. The AI even mistakenly identifies itself as ChatGPT at times, fueling speculation that China may have stolen or reverse-engineered the technology. On top of that, DeepSeek is allegedly collecting user data and storing it in China, raising concerns about privacy and national security. The US has already cracked down on AI chip exports to China, but this latest development proves China is still finding ways to catch up. If DeepSeek gains traction, it could shake up the entire AI market and put even more pressure on US companies. This isn't just an economic war anymore, it's a tech war, and the battle lines are being drawn. And here's the scary part: AI isn't just about making chatbots, it's about power. AI is now deeply tied to national security, military applications, and the global economy. Whoever leads in AI will have a massive advantage in almost every sector, from defense to finance to medicine. The US knows this, which is why they've been working overtime to restrict China's access to cutting-edge AI chips and technology. But despite those efforts, China is still pushing forward, finding workarounds, and building its own AI empire. A major reason for this is NVIDIA. The company has been at the center of AI chip production, and even though the US has tried to limit exports, China has still managed to get its hands on thousands of high-powered NVIDIA chips through loopholes in third-party countries. Some reports even suggest that Chinese companies are using places like Singapore as a front to buy these chips and then funnel them back into China. If that's true, it means the US is losing the sanctions game. At the same time, Chinese companies are using a different strategy: efficiency. While US firms are spending billions to train massive AI models, China is focusing on making smaller, more efficient models that require fewer resources. This approach allows them to develop competitive AI technology without the same level of investment or computing power. If they succeed, it could completely upend the AI race, proving that bigger isn't always better. Let's talk about what this means for the average person. Media to automation to cybersecurity. It also means that American companies could start losing their dominance, leading to job losses and economic shifts. And that's not even getting into the national security risks. The US government is already deeply concerned about Chinese tech firms collecting data, and with AI, the risks are even greater. And let's not forget about Taiwan. The AI war and the semiconductor war are deeply connected. If Taiwan continues to produce the world's most advanced chips, that gives the US a major advantage. But if China manages to take control of Taiwan, that could change everything. The US government has made it clear that they will defend Taiwan if necessary, but the reality is, if China makes a move, it's going to be messy. The world is heading into a new economic reality, and it's not going to be smooth sailing. The US-China trade war, Canada's retaliation, the semiconductor battle, and AI dominance aren't just headlines. They're events shaping the future of global economies, everyday jobs, and even how much people pay for basic goods. For the average person, this fight isn't just about governments flexing their muscles. It's about the cost of living going up, businesses struggling with supply chain disruptions, and industries being forced to rethink where and how they operate. Take manufacturing, for example. Trump's tariffs are meant to push companies to bring production back to the US. But what happens when that increases production costs? Do those companies absorb the cost, or do they pass it down to consumers? Spoiler alert, they pass it down. And if this trade war keeps escalating, people will start noticing it in ways they never expected. The price of cars, electronics, groceries, basically everything that relies on global supply chains, could see massive spikes. Businesses that rely on imports and exports will take a hit, leading to job losses, higher unemployment, and potentially even a global recession. But it's not just an economic issue, it's also a political one. Election seasons in both the US and Canada are coming up fast, and leaders are going to have to justify their trade policies to voters. Will Americans continue to support tariffs if they see prices climbing? Will Canadians support retaliation if it means lost trade opportunities? Public sentiment will shape what happens next, And right now, people are still trying to figure out which side of this fight they're on. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is watching closely. Europe is trying to balance its relationships with both the US and China, while Asian economies are figuring out how to position themselves in the middle of this economic showdown. Countries that rely on US trade are being forced to pick sides, and that could reshape alliances in ways we haven't seen before. And let's not forget the long-term effects of the AI race. If China gains the upper hand, it's not just about losing business to a competitor. It's about what happens when an authoritarian regime controls the most powerful technology in the world. If the US wins, it solidifies its position as a tech superpower. But at what cost? Privacy concerns, monopolization of AI, and government overreach are all on the table. So where does this all lead? A complete shift in global power? A world where China dominates AI while the US controls semiconductor production? A new economic divide between Western democracies and authoritarian regimes? No one knows for sure. But one thing is certain, the decisions being made right now by world leaders, corporations, and even consumers are going to determine the economic and technological future for generations to come. The question is, are we ready for it?